and welcome everyone to our next program, which is an artist panel for the companion exhibition to the conference Rupture, Ruptura. Before I begin, I want to say thank you so much to Lasc, the conference committee, and attendees for joining us today. I'm Gabrielle Tillenburg, and I'm a MA PhD student at the University of Maryland, where I study modern and contemporary Caribbean and diasporic art. And I'm the curator of this exhibition. So this exhibition can be found at go.umd.edu/rupture, and I encourage everyone to visit and take a look at all of the artist's work. But I will be sharing some of that work today in conjunction with this artist panel. Artists in Rupture Ruptura responded to an open call for art, inviting works that address ruptures. The culminating exhibition engages their wide-ranging responses. Represented are a diversity of media: painting, photography, video, performance, ceramic, fiber, and more, and a diversity of geographical and cultural points of view across the Americas, and one of our artists is even joining us from Germany. I am joined today by my colleague, Marco Polo Juárez Cruz, a PhD student studying 20th century Latin American and American art here at University of Maryland as well. We both would like to welcome our 4 panelists and special guests, artists in the exhibition. And artists, as I share your biographies, please take a second to wave and say hello verbally so that you appear on the screen. First, Aleka Medina, do you mind saying hello and waving? Was born in, awesome, thank you. Aleka Medina was born in Guatemala City, where she attended the Superior School of Art of the University of San Carlos, Guatemala. She attended the Münster Art Academy in Germany and studied abroad at the Escuela Superior de Artes de Yucatán México. She currently lives in Berlin. Juan Escobedo is here. Can you say hello? He is a visual artist and educator based in San Antonio, Texas. He holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts from New Mexico State University and a Master of Fine Arts from Massachusetts College of Art and Design. His work has been exhibiting nationally, and in 2019, he was selected as a participant in the New York Fine Art Immigrant Artist Mentoring Program, San Antonio. Next to Montoya, if you don't mind waving and saying hello.
Hello.
Montoya was born in Los Angeles, California, and raised between Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and Miami, Florida. She received a BFA from New World School of the Arts and Visual Arts in 2014, and she received her MFA from the University of Florida in May 2018. Next, Angelo Rodriguez. Can you say hello?
Hey, everyone. Good afternoon.
He is a 2018 BFA Fine Art Photography graduate from the Corcoran School of Arts and Design at George Washington University. He received an AA degree from Tedwater Community College in photography in 2016. His photography employs strategies of time and light to express retrospection and displacement prompted by the catalyst of familial geographic separation, and he currently lives in DC.
Thank you, Gabrielle, for your invitation to talk with these amazing artists and to walk us through the exhibition that you created. As Gabrielle was telling us, this exhibition moves through 4 thematic vignettes: women, borders and transnationalisms, time and place, and embodiment and the self. In the same way that disruption calls for us to break from traditional modes of categorization, the implementation of these themes is not intended to limit the scope of topics addressed by each work, so we invite you, the viewer, to consider how these threads make their way through the full exhibition. A reminder for all the people that is watching this conversation: you can post your questions in the Q&A window of the webinar or in the chat. We will be displaying parts of the exhibition during this talk, but feel free to wander around the virtual galleries that Gabi organized for the exhibition. We're gonna start talking with each of the artists now. We're gonna move in the order of their appearance in the exhibition, beginning with Aleka. Gabi has some questions prepared for her, and we're gonna have time at the end of our conversation for the questions of our audience, or also questions that the artists may have to each other.
So I'm going to just play some of the performance from Aleka Medina in the background here so that people can see a little bit of what I'm referencing. But in this video performance, Aleka, Desvergonzarse, you approach themes of post-war and healing in a deeply personal performance in which you clean an inscription off a piece of clothing. Could you talk about first the background behind the work and how healing is addressed in this medium of performance?
Yeah, okay. Actually, this performance was a really tough one because this piece of I don't know what is exactly the name, like nightgown, like that I am using, is from my aunt. She passed away in 2009, and I don't have a lot of things from my aunt, but this piece was really important because I was using it to. I wanted to use it in something special. And now, for me, it was really important to talk about this subject about healing. Healing is something that intergenerationally, so from generation to generation, is something that is not easy to talk, especially in women. And I wanted to talk about that because I always think if I heal, they heal. And in this thought, for me, it was really important to talk about the stories from each one of the members of the family. In English, I think members is like just a neutral word. In Spanish, is los miembros. For me, for example, it was really important to say las miembras from my family, to talk just about women and talk about, for example, the aggressors in her lives, and how those aggressors were even like really important male characters in my life, like my grandpa, my aunt, like really important loving persons. But in the when I was writing her stories, each one was for me really a moment to think about that and just realize how they were victims of a lot of violence, aggressions, and how they were not able to heal because there was no time, there was no money, there was not even the idea of healing. Was you wake up, you have to work, you have a lot of kids, you maybe get hit from your husband, you have to work, your life are your kids and nothing else. So I wanted to talk about that. At the beginning, it was really hard because I had also a picture of my family. I come just from a family full of women. So I see the picture and I put it there as a reminder of where I came from. And then I start cleaning all the stories, each one, even a little bit frenetic at the end. And at the end, I just put this cloth, really cold, really heavy, and and wet. And it's like that metaphor that if you don't clean and if you don't heal, if you don't clean everything, all the wounds, you just keep putting things inside and above and putting that, and at the end you are really heavy and you are like carrying and not even walking well and just carrying a lot of weight that come from different generations. And about that is this performance was really liberating for one side. In the other side, I think it's still an exercise. And for me, for example, was nice to share this in this exhibition, Rupture, because it was a break for me. It was a break in the quarantine for example, that I was able to sit and almost like just sit and think what just happened in a lot of times, and what was my past, what was their past, and what I know about those stories, because I don't know everything. I just know what they told me, or other people told me. And those stories that other people told me are sometimes those stories that you say you don't have to talk about that. No, about the things we don't talk. So about that is this performance. Yeah, shameless or desvergonzarse. That is actually desvergonzarse. Desvergonzar is like it was an adjective, but at the end it's an action, and is bringing the shame to the people that actually should be shamed, not the victims. So yeah, about that is the performance.
Thank you so much for that explanation. I think so much of what you just described comes across so poignantly. And something that you've touched on a little bit, but really came up for me in taking in your work is this record of labor. You know, you're recording yourself performing a form of labor that is often gendered. So thinking about women's labor, which is not only often invisibilized, but I also think about the labor behind healing and how, you know, as you speak of violence against women, necessitates this need for healing, but then healing can also be gendered as something feminine. Are gendered notions of labor specifically something that you've considered in your work?
Yeah, totally. I think labor is something that is really important, because it's not the first one. It's not the first work that I use this kind of subject about something that is called a lot of times because it's something that I have to make with those labors that as a woman I am just connected because I am a woman. So yeah, it's I think the place that I should be is something I am working a lot with, but it's still an exercise. And I think sometimes I think maybe it's a work that is already like coming to an end, but I don't think it's something that is a process right now. So the work at the end is not is not maybe the video, is the process about doing that. It's the process about finding those pictures. Is the process about things. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. And I had another question, but we do want to make sure that we get to all of the artists. So hopefully we can save that for later, but also a reminder for folks to add their questions to our Q&A if you'd like them addressed. Marco, would you like to continue?
Yes, of course. We're going to move now to the second part of the exhibition, that it's Borders and Transnationalism. And Juan Carlos is with us here today to talk about how during this section Gabrielle is thinking about how to expose the disruption of borders, migration, transnationalism, and how communities or personas are creating alternatives to break the distance, the time, the borders that are creating this separation. So Juan Carlos, thank you for joining us. I was looking at your artwork and specifically to your Houseman series. I would like to know how your own experiences of non-belonging or both in the border states of Texas and New Mexico, and also during your studies in New England, are reflected in the Houseman series.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me and having me. How do I start? So basically the Houseman is a creature or like a character that I developed a few years after I attended grad school. So as you mentioned before, I'm actually from El Paso, Texas, and it borders with Ciudad Juárez and also Sunland Park, New Mexico, which actually that's really where I grew up, and it's only like 5 minutes away from El Paso. El Paso, Sunland Park, and of course Ciudad Juárez is predominantly Mexican and the Spanish-speaking brown space. And moving to New England and pursuing a master's degree in a field that is generally associated or allotted for people that are a middle class and above, right? It was a pretty like crazy experience. There was a lot of like, I guess we could say like microaggressions that I was faced with, specifically with just like myself as like who I was, how did I learn the language specifically, people assuming that I was an international student. And so that really placed, it had me question my identity a lot, right? Because as a young kid, my mom was a person that came into the United States illegally, but she was really proud that we were born in the United States, that we were Americans, we could do whatever the hell we wanted to. And then moving to New England and people being like, how did you learn English so well? What's your motherland? Things like that, really weird shit. I mean, it was really weird shit. And so that sort of stuck with me a lot. At the same time, I was creating and I was using I was using a lot of cardboard and making work that was based off of cardboard, and I was focused a lot on homes. And originally I didn't know why I was doing it. It was just me being homesick, essentially. And then later I realized that these depictions of my homes really started to, or the homes that I grew up with, or the homes that I was associating myself with, really showed pretty much like my socioeconomic status, that I grew up in a poor area of Sunland Park, New Mexico, and my family themselves, they were from a really poor area in Ciudad Juárez. And so that I started to identify really closely to the cardboard itself, not only the color, but also the way that people perceive cardboard. So as a utilitarian object, right? It's only for specific things, and like a non-art material. So I developed this character after all like several years of being like, what the fuck happened? Like, what did I just experience? And so Houseman is sort of like this alien creature, I guess, that entered into our space. And the way that I think about people's identities is that it deals a lot with your background, right? So your environment. So Houseman himself is composed of several environments, and he enters an environment, right? So then it creates like this imbalance, or this sort of, I guess, rupture, you would say, because you don't know where exactly he sits or where he stands. And it fluctuates constantly. And so that was a long explanation to your question, but that's sort of my thought process behind how I developed Houseman.
Thank you. No, it was a great response. And also, actually, it gives me the opportunity to skip one of my questions, because I was interested in your perspective, the use of the material, the cardboard, because cardboard can be associated as a medium of disruption, because it's a non-traditional medium associated with both precarity. We are thinking about homeless people, or also how is the most basic elemental material to build a shelter, a space to cover you from the rain, from the air. But it's also associated in the artistic practice as a non-finished project, right? It's a part of a sketch and non-finished work of art, and a sculptural, just an idea and sketch. So how you are thinking about the use of cardboard in these ambivalent positions?
That's really good. A good question, actually. Well, the originally, like I mentioned before, I was using cardboard. The truth is, I was a poor ass like grad student, right? And all the money that I was getting was just going to surviving. I was in a painting, the painting department, but I didn't have money to like be paying like these $30 tubes, $50 tubes of paint. At the same time, I was trying to move away from the square. I was painting on paper, and then from there I was like, well, I can just paint on cardboard because it's substantial, it has a form, it could stand up by itself, but I can also like rip it up and do things to it. But I was faced with a lot of like, why cardboard? Like that was always the question. And I just never understood why not, right? And the truth is, you're right about the sheltering part, right? When my family, they're from Chihuahua, but they moved up to Ciudad Juárez for job opportunities. So they worked in factories and things like that. And when they acquire a land, which was like in the, I guess it would be like the west part of Ciudad Juárez, they, in order to avoid squatters coming in and taking over the land, they had to establish a home. And so what they would do is that they established these cardboard houses. And from a very young age, I was very fascinated by that. And I was like, oh my God, this cardboard house, like this house is made out of cardboard. And so in my head, I think subconsciously, I always had the idea that cardboard could be more than just like a box to put and mail things. And so I'm like moving back and forth in time, but grad school, people are like, don't use cardboard. If you are using cardboard, cover it up because you need to transform it, right? Especially in the department that I was, like painting is all about transforming a substance into something different, right? I mean, that is what painting is. But then there was one professor that sort of encouraged me, or just was like, dude, you're not going to be able to transform this cardboard. So either you're going to have to use another material or just embrace that it's going to be cardboard and something else. And so that's what I did. I just tried to embrace it. And then later, once I realized, I was like, oh, this cardboard is like me. It's like this poor material. It's brown. Maybe I should stop trying to cover it up, and maybe I should just let it be brown and let it be unfinished. And I do feel like it resonates more with people because people are bothered by it a little bit more. They're like, why isn't it finished? It's going to decompose. What are you doing to protect it? Like all these questions that always come about. And I think that, I don't know, that resonates more. Anyways, yes.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. I'm gonna keep my last question for the Q&A part of our conversation. And I want to move now to the third section of the exhibition, Time and Place. So we have here Sue Montoya that is gonna talk with us about these conversations on borders and transnationalism and how to consider also time and place. Sue Montoya is looking at materials, receptacles of memory and place, and how structures, materiality, corporality is both real and imagined. Thank you for joining us, Sue. My first question is related to how in Latin America and the Caribbean, there's a history that is constructed as a region at par with utopian ideas of development and modernization. So it can be paradigmatic that clay, the barro that you're using, is associated both with traditional pottery and the construction bricks that bring us these buildings, this modernization, this spirit of modernization that we are looking for. So could you talk about how you started to focus on materials as receptacles of memory?
So thank you again for inviting me to this talk and the show. For me, materials has always been, particularly the earth has always been really significant to my practice because one of my earliest memories is playing in the dirt and just having like a ton of fun. It's something that sort of went away when I moved to the States because my parents didn't feel as comfortable. Also, another context is that my family has historically worked with the earth. My dad is a carpenter and a construction worker. And so these materials have always been around my home, whether that was in Honduras or Miami. So that's why drywall and the barro have like this significant play in the work. I also think that there is like this very beautiful metaphor in the fact that the things that the earth not only holds us and is the foundation, but it also houses us in a way and nourishes us in a way that is very particular to Latin America, right?
Thank you, Sue. And this artwork that we are seeing now, Valle One, you are presenting us this interaction between traditional materials such as the barro rojo and also the tabla roca, the drywall, that it's associated with another way to construct a more mechanized construction method, some idea that it's more associated with a quick construction, with modernization. So how you are conceptualizing this interaction between traditional materials and more modern or more technological materials?
So for me, place really has a significant role, and the tabla roca or the drywall sort of comes from living in Miami and that being the predominant material that's used to construct homes. And then I'm currently in Mexico City, so the barro de Oaxaca is something that's widely used here. So in my own sort of artistic practice and learning about the place that I'm in, that's how this sort of interest in materials came about. It's always sort of influenced by where I'm at geographically and also just being considerate of the materials that are around me, right?
And I also want to know about the relation, the close relation, the association between material and technique. Because in some of your, the materials that you're using, there's a manipulation, there's the presence of a technique. Of course, photograph goes around with the presence of the people that is taking the pictures. The shapes of the barro rojo that you are modeling are adapted to according to your needs, but also the drywall is, we can think about as a placement, as something that you take and add to your installations. So can you tell us something about this creative process that you are following, about how you are adapting these different techniques to their installations?
I think it speaks to my practice as well, in the sense that it always starts with a memory, and that usually translates into the photograph. So the photographs that you see that I've taken around the Tumbla were the original kind of ideas, and they stem from childhood memories. Then you get into the drywall or the tabla roca, which are remnants from my father's like construction work. And then you get into the teardrops or the drops in general, the Oaxaca clay pieces, which those are sort of even further from the original idea or the original thought of this childhood memory, in that they serve as a work to contemplate and meditate the past, because they take so long to create, and because I have this goal of creating a mountain of them. So it's like this never ending work or idea process, like much like practicing or looking back at the past is for me personally.
And my last question is related to some installations that you are creating that give us the sense of a construction site, at this space that it's developing in a gallery, and how you are differentiating these spaces that you are creating or adapting to a certain gallery space to the photographs or the spaces of memory that you are capturing with the photographs. How you are dealing with this difference between something that you are constructing, creating in a space, rather than other things that you are co-opting or getting from the impressions of your own biography.
I think that a part of it is to invite people into my experience and the experience of many other people. The piece that you're talking about was inspired by living in a construction site and growing up in one. I think that many people can relate to having parents who are constantly trying to improve your home and what that means in the long term I also, another reason for that work is because I often feel like the white cube or the gallery sort of negates or ignores the fact that it is constructed, and oftentimes it is constructed by people of color, and what that means for, you know, someone like me who didn't necessarily see themselves in represented in these spaces. So I want to highlight the fact that this is a constructed space, and also that people oftentimes live in this constant state of construction. So whether that's metaphorically or literally, from the self or through the environment. Um, yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Sue. And we're gonna move now back to Gabrielle.
So in our last section of the exhibition, we look at embodiment in the self. And now I invite Michelangelo to talk about his work, which is photography. As I mentioned, he has studied photography most recently at the Corcoran School of Art here close by to University of Maryland. And in your first work, this really disrupts this idea of a portrait, as the title suggests. It's man with a rubber plant. And you've addressed how your photographs create metaphor in your artist statement, metaphor for your personal experiences. What is your approach to the object as containing traces of personhood? And could you perhaps reflect on the selection of objects present in the work here?
Absolutely. And thank you again for inviting me to this panel and inviting my work to the show. Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I believe that objects hold a lot of information, but also hold a lot of meaning. Um, I can start off by saying that, you know, I come from a family of like father and son passing down the dream of becoming a professional baseball player. And for me, that's like one of the foundations of like who I've chose to like become, or like how I choose to see myself. Um, because that was such a pivotal point in like figuring out what I was gonna do when I grew up. So when making this photograph, I mean, I knew I had these objects and I wanted to use them. And it kind of just happened organically. I started to add things to the photograph or to the composition and taking pictures as I continued to add things until I reached this point. Chess, you can see a little small chess, magnetic chessboard, um, kind of leaning up against the pot of the rubber tree or rubber plant. That was one of the things that my father taught me at an early age, was to play chess. And that holds a lot of meaning now that he has passed. Um, and it kind of exists as a metaphor because, you know, people always say that like chess is like life. Um, and I like the dynamic that it adds to the photograph. And the same thing with the other objects in the photograph. They kind of just add little like tidbits of like my life experiences that exist within these objects that I have in my apartment or around.
Thank you so much. And your second work here, High Ground Por Si Tsunami, references environmental disruption, but you have, you've talked about this experience with sports and something that's very foundational to your sense of self. How does this work look both outward to this landscape, but inward as a self-reflection as well?
Well, outward, so in 2019, around like Christmas time, I went down to Puerto Rico to visit some family, and I was in an art show and whatnot. Just so happens at the time, um, on December 28, 2019, began a phenomenon of earthquakes in the southwest part of the island where my family is from. And you know, we would come to this neighborhood that had this basketball court because my uncle lived up the street, and I wanted to photograph it because it just stood out to me the way that the the court is kind of abandoned, almost like how certain dreams in one's life can be like kind of set aside or like put on the back burner, and you know how the like the pastoral, like the grass is not kept and kind of neglected by the city which is an effect of in itself of like the effects of like Maria and Irma, the hurricanes, where like the municipalities are still struggling to maintain themselves. Well, unfortunately, on January 7th, 2020, there was the 6.4 earthquake that kind of hit global news, and we were able to evacuate the house that we were staying in that was deemed inhabitable afterwards. And this was the place that we actually evacuated to because it is high ground in the town of Guayanilla in Puerto Rico. So we spent all day here, and this was the first light of the day. This was probably taken around like 6:30 in the morning. Um, and to me, it represents that experience, but also, it has that undertone of like the basketball court and the foundation and that kind of like dismissed dream of becoming, something that maybe at some point became unreachable. Um, yeah.
Thank you so much for describing this work in such detail. And it really makes me think about how landscapes like these and just the island of Puerto Rico is threatened by environmental disruptions and climate change. And so thinking about change, we often consider that the camera is a medium that captures a moment in time. But obviously time continues, right? There's changes to the landscape, and there's even physical changes to the photograph itself, or even a digital photo file digitally. So do you think about this aspect of time and change in your work and how that relates to your use of the medium?
Absolutely. And I think that this would be easier for me to explain it talking about or answer this question talking about the man with the rubber plant photograph, because, like I said, these objects hold meaning, and over time, they become representations of people. Like if I was to leave, or for example, not even that way, like how the the dream of becoming a professional baseball player is passed down through father and son. Like the baseball may not even been connected to that, um, to my grandfather or my father, but the baseball holds that story. And by me sharing that story, then it continues on and on. And I think that through photography, it's obviously like a method of capturing memories. And with those memories come stories. And as long as you keep continuing to share them, then, the life lives on, or the story lives on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. At this time, I will stop screen sharing the exhibition, and I just want to make sure that, again, invite any questions from our attendees and participants. I know that Marco and I had some questions that we still wanted to ask. I will also say that I am always interested to hear if artists have questions for each other. I think some really fascinating conversations do happen that way. But I will just kick it off if people want to think about that for a second. I was curious, Aleka, about your drawing practice, because you have other mediums that you explore, and drawing being one of them. I was curious what significance mark making has for you, considering how you're thinking about intergenerational relationships, and how you're capturing that with the mark making on your piece of clothing, but also how in the process of washing that you still have traces from those marks, how you might also have traces of these intergenerational relationships. Is mark making something conceptually prominent for you in your work?
I always say drawing is my machete. Drawing is my tool, and everything starts always with a sketch. Sometimes this sketch is not a sketch; it's a full artwork, and I say no, it's finished. Yeah, and sometimes it's like no, I think this is going to be that thing. So I hear a lot my intuition. That is something that is not that easy, because what is intuition? It's really complicated to explain, but for me, drawing is something like, that's why I really like it, and I like it. I cannot paint. I really like, I used to paint, but I cannot paint. For me, paint is like a little bit putting, you know, like how you say, like capas, like, I forgot the word, like covering something.
Or,
But
yeah.
when I draw something, it's like it stays forever and is there, and is something that happened also in these stories. I was putting the stories in the nightgown, and then I was like, this is going to stay forever or not, and that's why I was doing that with the stories. But actually, I always start, or I can say, drawing is really important for me, like really important. It's something that I make a dialogue with myself, with some other process that I am starting. And yeah, drawing is really important, and the marks and the ink and the shapes mostly, and mostly like ink is really important for me. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
definitely.
you. We have a question for Michelangelo. The people are asking, how does movement play a role in your work?
Movement is something that I think is very important in my work. At first, when I was picking up photography practicing, um, I practiced long exposures a lot because there was something that interested me about it. Um, in photography, there's like the ghosting effect, where something has motion blur, and you can kind of see where the image has, or the figure has moved in the portrait. And I think that that was very important to me because it kind of created more of a pause, like a still image. You know, it freezes it freezes time, and you know, it's more factual. But with motion blur or ghosting of an image, it becomes kind of poetic or metaphoric, and to me, that is more interesting. Um, for me to be able to try to create a poetic response or a poetic interpretation of something that has motion blur. Um, and for me, that's something that I really like. Um,
Thank you. We also have another question here from Lisa. She says, I notice how the titles of the works often provide critical information about how we interpret them. Michelangelo's portrait, for example, tells us, portrait in quotations, tells us to think about the absent human element in the image. Could all of you reflect on the process of choosing a title, and at what stage in the process you find titles? Maybe if you don't mind, we could start with Juan Carlos. I think you have a very, what seems like this houseman is such a catchy a catchy phrase, and you describe action in your title. So would you mind maybe kicking us off?
Sure. I usually choose the title after it's been made. I've actually always been really bad about giving works titles, and my brain works to like almost like it's always been like a narrative. So as you guys saw right now, when you asked a question, I have to go back like 10 million years and be like, oh, this is where it all rooted to. So that's how, like, I always think of the titles as little stories that is just like, oh, this is what this person is doing now. And it could be something that I'm like seeing in the actual piece, or sometimes it's just things that I'm going through that have nothing related to the title, and I'll just put it in there because I'm being annoying or sarcastic or whatever. But that's just me.
I would also invite folks to check out, at some point, I would love if all the artists could put, if they don't mind adding their websites and Instagrams into the chat so people can follow you. I always say, please support living artists who are currently working, especially young artists such as everyone here, by sharing their work. You can always support them in the best way by purchasing their artwork too. And I was just going to say that if you check out Juan Carlos's work too, and some of his other, I have to commend you for a different series, and with the use of emojis where the titles are really quite hilarious. So I appreciate the sense of humor coming across in your titles as well. Would anybody else like to speak a little bit to titles and their significance? I think like you certainly touched on this a little bit. Sue, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, especially with reference, I think, to place in your titles.
I think I'm pretty boring in picking my titles. I just go based off of where the work was made. And yeah, I always struggle with it. It's the eternal struggle for me.
I think for me in this work was kind of a mantra. I was the whole time in the time that I was watching like really frenetic. I was the whole time saying desvergonzarse haciendo la vergüenza, like really frenetic. And it's something that at the end, because I was like, what name, but then I saw, or I just felt, okay, the title just came in the process, like everything came. So for me, I think the title in this piece or wasn't like that. In other ones, is a little bit a struggle. Yeah.
I would like to ask a question that maybe could put in dialogue both Aleka and Juan Carlos' work, because I'm thinking about the presence of the object. As you are explaining us right now, Aleka, the object that you are using, you are creating this performatic healing activity to erase certain elements ingrained in the object. But on the other side, Juan Carlos is evidencing the nature of the material, but putting these objects that are so foreign, so strange to the places where they are seated. So I would like to know how you understand the object as a memento, as this space, this object related or ingrained in a certain time.
Ingrained, or what was the last part?
It is ingrained in a space or time that it's, in your case, so strange for the location that you are using. And in the case of Aleka, it's the strangeness, is the heaviness of the object that it's the one that needs to be erased.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I mean, I think for me, the houseman himself is just like this liminal being that, like I mentioned before, can't really hold on. Like there's no space that it can actually sit in. So for me, it's just like this representation of like individuals that are multicultural or multilinguistic, where there's sometimes like this in-betweenness, right? And potentially like a physical, like if we could create like a physical manifestation of that, right? Like this, like a nepantlero or like a liminal being, like what could it be? And so that's the way that I see houseman, right? So something that is in constant flux, can't really ever be like, there's no actual, like it has a physicality, but it blends in. That's, I think that's what you're asking.
Well, for me, it was in this work, the object and the location also was really important, because it's a was a really strong meaning because it was from someone that I used to love a lot. And then she just passed away. Like actually my aunt, she was 45. So I'm going to tell a story. She was 45 and she was like, okay. And the next day she just passed away. Like was a heart infarct. So, and she just passed away. And she was like really healthy. And for us it was something that just hit us. And for me was this also just gave me the notion what death and life is, and I just was really in this encounter of what is that, like we are such a we are nothing, and one day we're alive, other day we're not alive, and was really crazy. That's why when I came back from Germany, I was just for the vacations, and then I could not go back to come. I could not came back here because of the pandemic and everything. And after that, my aunt, no, my nana told me, "Hey, you want to sleep with this?" And I was like, "No, I cannot sleep with my aunt nightshirt because it's really like something precious for me." In the other side, I just took a marker and I started like drawing in it, and it was like, no. And then I realized it was really important because it was something that just me in something that has a lot of meaning, a little precious stone, and I want to do something with it, but I didn't want to put it in a frame. I wanted to put her in a frame and my others miembros in a frame. So that's why in this work, the object is really important, and also the location, because the place that I was filming it was the place where a woman is always cleaning, and is the mother, the mom of my boyfriend, and she's always cleaning. And even if I say no, I'm going to do some things, or we have to help you because of course we are the whole day, and she's no, because this is my time, the time that I am here alone doing things and thinking. And then I just realized how crazy is this idea that we like labor for women is like so in, it's really intrinsic and it's so deep in us as a woman, that just I was thinking about a lot about that. And I was thinking a lot about also how this is important, that subject about healing and about giving time to yourself and about just working with yourself. But there's no chance, there's no notion about that, there's no this idea, because we are working always for someone else. That's why the location and the object was really important with this work. Yeah.
I also have a question actually to maybe bring Michelangelo and Sue into conversation with each other, because both of you made reference to family members, specifically like your fathers. And I wonder, thinking about Michelangelo, you brought up this idea of the photograph as something to capture memories and stories with, and how we engage with photography perhaps for the first time as a way to capture, family memories. How has that family connection played a role in in the medium in that way, or are there other ways that you're engaging in familial connection, and is that something that you find important in your work or not?
Yeah. So I think that how, this experience of like, like father and son, or like familiar connections, how it plays a part for me is that for me, my father was passed when I was young. And I think that, you know, that experience, that trauma has like created some type of like, you know, feeling, and um, that influences how, or that influences the work, the type of work that I make, or like, or the way that I think about the work in a way. And I'm not saying it's unique, but I think that that in a way um, is comparable to somebody else's experience, um, and how they feel about certain things because of what they've experienced. Um, but that's what I'd like to say, that, you know, just that connection or that relation has influenced the way that I feel, and has, you know, inspired how the work I make looks, or the context of it.
I think I totally relate to that. And for me, photography, particularly the archive of the family uh, documentation, has always been significant because I did live apart from my father for a very long time, to the point where I only knew him through photographs. And when I did meet him, I didn't recognize him. And so photography has always been very emblematic to how I navigate my family relationships, particularly because there's always been distance. And that was, whether it's between, you know, my father or my extended family now that have been in the States for so long. So there's always been this kind of connection between memory and, you know, the archive of the family image.
Thank you so much. We have just a few minutes left. I wanted to just open it up and see if any of the artists have any questions for each other. I want to give y'all a chance to speak to each other as well. If not, that's okay. Marco Polo, did you have anything else that you'd want to add?
Maybe just to add to your question, also to Michelangelo and Sue, because I'm finding this connection of artworks that are self-referential, that you're talking about your families, your history, but also you are taking out this part of your compositions, of your photographs. So how you are negotiating, how you are creating these works that are at the same time so personal, so connected to your stories, but at the same time, this part is separated from the artwork, and you are showing us these spaces of introspection, these spaces of solitude. So how you are doing these connections with the absence of the reference in the artwork.
All right, if I'm being totally honest, the reason it's absent for me is because I went to a predominantly white school where whenever I spoke about this, I was told that no one cared. So it's a symptom of that. I know that sounds really dark, but it is. I'm currently just trying to sort of unpack that and what that means in my practice, because I realize it's devoid of it. And I realize I don't have to do that. So that's just my experience.
I think to answer this, the idea of making artwork that's comparable, or relatable. Um, if I was to add, I mean, there are photographs where I do include my family, and, you know, through a very, you know, strict, or like, you know, brutal, like selective process. Like, these are the images that I choose to show, and it's just something that I think is organic in a way that I've selected them. But I mean, I'm pretty sure that has something to do with like how I went through school, and how I was affected by my peer judgment and stuff like that too. Like as Sue is saying as well.
Thank you, everyone. Again, I really want to emphasize how grateful we are for your presence today, your participation in the exhibition, and your willingness to speak so candidly about your artwork and share with everyone here at the University of Maryland and also our community beyond what goes on behind the scenes of all of the work that we see. It offered tremendous insight. I also wanted to thank Marco Polo for joining me today in co-moderating this panel. And before I close, Marco, did you want to close and say anything?
Yeah, also thank everybody for watching us. We're gonna have a 15-minute break now, and at 3:30 we're gonna have our keynote panel with Clara Irazabala, Janilda Gonzalez, and Daniel Coleman. So stay with us.
Thank you, everyone.